to thrive in our increasingly digital world. We can, must, and importantly are seizing the initiative from adversaries in order to protect and defend the American people. Last year, President Biden issued the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which outlines a bold vision for a prosperous, connected future and calls for us to build a future that has a foundation of deep and enduring collaboration among stakeholders in the digital ecosystem. The National Cybersecurity Strategy is threat agnostic, technology agnostic, and is built on two fundamental shifts: that we must, one, rebalance the responsibility to defend cyberspace, and two, realign incentives to favor long-term investments. Today, end users of technology, the individuals, small businesses, and critical infrastructure entities that make up constituencies in your districts, bear too much responsibility for keeping our nation secure. We must demand more from the most capable actors in cyberspace, including the government. And we must build future systems to be more inherently defensible and resilient. This means that market forces and public programs alike must reward security and resilience. This leads directly to the first pillar of the strategy, which is simple in concept but daunting in scope: defend critical infrastructure. As we can see from PRC targeting, critical infrastructure systems are on the terrain on which our adversaries wish to engage us. And critical infrastructure owners and operators, the majority of whom are private entities, not governments, are on the front lines. Part of our success, then, will come from scaling public-private partnership and collaboration. Beyond scaling these collaborative mechanisms and setting clear, harmonized cybersecurity requirements, the government must also be a good partner when an incident has occurred and federal assistance is required. And even as we shore up our defense, we must also look to change the dynamics in cyberspace to favor defenders. That means, for example, addressing the open research problem of software measurability that makes it difficult to understand the quality of code we use, a topic that OECD is working to elevate. We are also working to address the over 500,000 open jobs in cyber fields. It is vital that we invest in workforce programs to improve the pipeline of talent, expand opportunities for all citizens to learn digital skills, and open these good-paying jobs and careers to all segments of society, including those who have never seen themselves in cyber. This administration is tackling this through implementation of the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy released by OECD in July. The administration's focus on cybersecurity has put us on a firm strategic footing to counter the threats from the PRC actors and others. But we will only seize the initiative by leveraging the foundational partners that we rely on, including Congress. Ultimately, cybersecurity requires a unity of effort. No one entity can achieve our shared goals alone. Sitting here today with our close partners, I hope you'll see how our U.S. team is enhanced by thoughtful, patriotic cyber practitioners at all levels of government and from across industry, working together to build a defensible, resilient digital ecosystem. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Director Easterly, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Gallagher, Ranking Member Krishnamurthy, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on CISA's efforts to protect the nation from the preeminent cyber threat from the People's Republic of China. As America's civilian cyber defense agency and the national coordinator for critical infrastructure resilience and security, we have long been focused on the cyber threat from China. But as you've heard, in recent years, we have seen a deeply concerning evolution in Chinese targeting of U.S. critical infrastructure. In particular, we've seen Chinese cyber actors, including those known as Volt Typhoon, burrowing deep into our critical infrastructure to enable destructive attacks in the event of a major crisis or conflict. This is a world where a major crisis halfway across the planet could well endanger the lives of Americans here at home through the disruption of our pipelines, the severing of our telecommunications, the pollution of our water facilities, the crippling of our transportation modes, all to ensure that they can incite societal panic and chaos and to deter our ability to marshal military might and civilian will. Now, the threat is not theoretical. Leveraging information from our government and industry partners, CISA teams have found and eradicated Chinese intrusions in multiple critical infrastructure sectors, including aviation, water, energy, transportation. Now, based on this information, this is likely just the tip of the iceberg. So we're working aggressively with our partners in industry and across the U.S. government to take action now, knowing that this threat is real and this threat is urgent. First, through authorities from the Congress, based on a recommendation from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, we are using our Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, or JCDC, to catalyze robust operational collaboration with industry and government to enable us to uncover additional Chinese malicious activity and to develop ways to more rapidly detect it. We are also using our free services and resources in providing intelligence to critical infrastructure owners and operators across the country so that they can detect and prevent Chinese malicious activity. And we're using our now hundreds of subject matter experts and advisors across the nation to work directly with businesses to help them improve the security and resilience of the critical services that Americans rely on every hour of every day. The reality is, however, eradicating Chinese intrusions, bolstering resilience, and even some of the great disruptive work that Director talked about, it's all necessary, but it's not sufficient. The truth is, the Chinese cyber actors have taken advantage of very basic flaws in our technology. We've made it easy on them. Unfortunately, the technology underpinning our critical infrastructure is inherently insecure because of decades of software developers not being held liable for defective technology. That has led to incentives where features and speed to market have been prioritized against security, leaving our nation vulnerable to cyber invasion. That has to stop. Technology manufacturers must ensure that China and other cyber actors cannot exploit the weaknesses in our technology to saunter through the open doors of our critical infrastructure to destroy it. It has to change. We are at a critical juncture for our national security. Today's hearing should serve as an urgent call to action. Specifically, every victim of a cyber incident should report it to CISA or FBI every time, knowing that a threat to one is a threat to all, and cybersecurity is national security. Every critical infrastructure entity should establish a relationship with their local CISA team and take advantage of our free services, including vulnerability scanning, to ensure they can identify and prevent the vulnerabilities that the Chinese cyber actors are using. Every critical infrastructure entity should use these services and CISA cybersecurity performance goals, as well as the advisories that we've published with NSA and FBI and international partners to do the necessary investments in cyber hygiene to ensure that they can protect their networks, including throughout their supply chains. Every critical infrastructure entity needs to double down on resilience. Businesses need to prepare for and expect an attack, and test and prepare for and exercise their critical systems so that they can continue to operate through a disruption and recover rapidly to provide services to the American people. Finally, every technology manufacturer must build, test, and deploy technology that is secure by design. We have to drive towards a future where cyber actors cannot take advantage of technology defects to break into our critical infrastructure. This is a future underpinned by a software liability regime based on a measurable standard of care and safe haven for those software developers who do responsibly innovate by prioritizing security first. Now, none of this is possible unless every CEO, every business leader, every board member for a critical infrastructure company recognizes that cyber risk is business risk, and managing it is a matter of both good governance and fundamental national security. Thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. General Nakasone, you're recognized.
Chairman Gallagher, Ranking Member Krishnamurthy, members of the Select Committee, I'm honored to represent the men and women of U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency as my time as the Commander and Director draws to a close. Thank you for this opportunity to reflect on the considerable changes I've witnessed in the technological and operational environments over my nearly 6-year tenure, and to hear your concerns. The People's Republic of China poses a challenge unlike any our nation and allies have ever faced, competing fiercely in the information domain. PRC cyber actors are pre-positioning in our U.S. critical infrastructure, and it is not acceptable. Defending against this activity is our top priority. The men and women of U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency continue to maintain our strategic advantage by contesting the threats posed by the PRC in cyberspace by using the full scope of our authorities and the full spectrum of our capabilities to impose costs, deny benefits, and encourage restraint on the part of our adversary. We will continue to strengthen partnerships across the U.S. government, foreign partners, and private industry so that we may operate anywhere we are needed. We are ready and postured to contest PRC malicious activities at home and abroad. While cyberspace threats have increased, our force to counter these threats are stronger and more capable. U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency are using our capabilities and partnerships to deny the PRC opportunities, frustrate their strategic efforts, and systematically eradicate intrusions. One significant contribution in our ability to counter these threats is our relationship with the private sector. U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency partnerships with industries have underpinned the U.S. government's ability to track, detect, and mitigate the PRC's activity against U.S. infrastructure at scale. One example of the impact of these strong relationships was demonstrated in May of 2023 with the Cybersecurity Advisory, which was the first documented PRC activity against U.S. critical infrastructure, referred to publicly as Volt Typhoon. For the first time ever, 11 different industry partners co-sealed the NSA advisory along with our interagency partners. Additionally, other industry partners contributed behind the scenes in partnership with our Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. Lastly, I would like to reiterate my appreciation for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon and recognize the committee's continued efforts to bring attention to this critically important issue, which impacts our national security and the lives and livelihoods of the American people. I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, sir. Director Easterly, your opening statement, both written and spoken, I commend the written statement as well, really kind of teases out the troubling implications of an attack on our critical infrastructure. I read it and I'm sort of left with the implication that China's pursuing a strategy designed to either hold us hostage in the event of an international incident such that we would be afraid to respond, or to actually cause casualties on the homeland. Is that an accurate assessment that I could take from your testimony?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, as I alluded to, it is Chinese military doctrine to attempt to induce societal panic in their adversary. And arguably, the Chinese government got a little bit of a taste of this in the aftermath of the ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, May of 2021, that shut down gas to the eastern seaboard for several days. Americans couldn't get to work, they couldn't take their kids to school, get folks to the hospital. It caused a bit of panic. Now, imagine that on a massive scale. Imagine not one pipeline, but many pipelines disrupted. Telecommunications going down so people can't use their cell phone. People start getting sick from polluted water. Trains get derailed. Air traffic control system, port control systems are malfunctioning. This is truly an everything, everywhere, all at once scenario. And it's one where the Chinese government believes that it will likely crush American will for the U.S. to defend Taiwan in the event of a major conflict there. Now, this is also a scenario that we can and indeed must prevent through both the robust practices that I mentioned in my statement, which amounts to deterrence by denial and resilience, but also through the deterrence and escalation of punishment, a credible threat, and then perhaps most importantly, through American strength and unity and the power of our values.
And General Nakasone, what would, if you have to assume they're targeting our critical infrastructure in Guam and other territories in the Pacific, what would an attack on that critical infrastructure mean for our ability to respond in the event of a crisis?
It could have a very significant impact on what we need to do to provide a series of different options that our commander in the Indo-Pacific region would want to respond with. Communications, an ability to be able to leverage our most lethal weapon systems. These are all areas that we would rely on.
And Director Wray, remind me again of this stat I thought was stunning in your opening statement, that if you focused all of the FBI's cyber professionals on the China threat, we would still be at what sort of disadvantage with respect to the humans in China that are focusing on America?
We would be at a disadvantage of at least 50 to 1.
50 to 1.
And part of the reason I say at least is because one of the things we've also seen from the Chinese government, which has devoted massive resources to the biggest hacking program in the world by a mile, is that they also work with cyber criminals.
Yeah.
Which is then a whole force multiplier to that already significant enterprise.
Roughly how many people or percentage of your resources are devoted to China, would you say?
Of our resources?
Yeah.
I mean, it is the biggest chunk of our counterintelligence program by far, and probably the biggest chunk of our cyber program by far. And then, of course, we have other divisions like our weapons of mass destruction folks who are the ones who did the work on COVID origins, for example, for the FBI. We have criminal folks, criminal investigation folks working on sort of the fentanyl part, which, of course, much of that is coming from precursors in China. So it's really a threat that pervades and permeates almost all of our programs.
And you have previously testified when it comes to TikTok that it screams of national security concerns. Why? What is the risk posed by TikTok, in your opinion?
Well, the most important starting point is the role of the Chinese government. The app's parent company is effectively beholden to the Chinese government, and that is what in turn creates a series of national security concerns in the PRC government's ability to leverage that access or that authority. So first, the data. It gives them the ability to control data collection on millions of users, which could be used for all sorts of intelligence operations or influence operations. Second, the recommendation algorithm, which could be used for all sorts of influence operations or to sow divisiveness, discord. And again, that's something that we wouldn't readily detect, which makes it even more of a pernicious threat. And AI, of course, enhances all of that. Their ability to collect U.S. person data and feed it into those influence operations makes it exponentially more dangerous to Americans. And then third and finally, it gives them the ability, should they so choose, to control the software on millions of devices, which means the opportunity to technically compromise millions of devices. As you put all those things together, it is a threat that I think is very, very significant. And again, it all starts back with the starting point, which is the Chinese government itself and their role and their ability to control these different aspects of it.
Thank you. My time has expired. I'm excited to recognize the ranking member because his questioning game and prop game improves with every hearing. So, and as they say, game respects game. So the ranking member is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to discuss the impact of cyber attacks, real-world cyber attacks that are happening today in Ukraine at the behest of Russia. Recently, the Russians cut off internet access for tens of millions of Ukrainians in one cyber attack alone. And they then cut off power for hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians in a separate cyber attack. And so I have a question for General Nakasone. You know, we actually depict this here. It could look something like this. In a conflict situation, the CCP could aim to attack American infrastructure the same way that the Russians are attacking Ukraine, right?
That's correct.
Let me turn to a potential real cyber attack by the CCP. General Nakasone, so far we've discovered CCP malware in certain critical infrastructure, but they haven't been activated yet. In the event that this malware were activated, you'd be able to attribute it back to the CCP just like you did with Volt Typhoon, right?
We are very good at attributing. That's correct.
Now, General Nakasone, in 2018, you were at the Aspen Security Forum, and here's a picture of you 5 years ago, and you said this, which really caught my eye. It said, if a nation state decided to attack our critical infrastructure, that's above the threshold of war. Isn't that what you said?
So I do recall appearing there, and from that quote, yes, and I probably would have said it differently today, Ranking Member.
And then the next part of that quotation also caught my eye. You continued by saying, and we would certainly respond. And in your written statement, you talk about imposing costs on potential adversaries. So I just want you to say very clearly here, Cybercom indeed has the capability to respond decisively.
It does, and this is a really important point. We cannot be episodic in looking at this threat. We need to be persistently engaged every single day with a series of different capabilities, working with a series of different partners to both enable and act. What we have done over the past 5 years is been able to look at imposing costs in a much broader fashion. Whether or not it's publishing in an unclassified manner what the adversary is doing, whether or not it's working with the Bureau, whether or not it's being able to work closely with Justice and Treasury, this is the idea of consistently being able to persistently be engaged with your adversary.
I just want to send a message to anybody who's paying attention here, whether it's the CCP or anyone else who would intend to put malware into our critical infrastructure. First, we will attribute it back to you if it's activated. Secondly, that could be an act of war. And third, we will respond decisively. Let me move to another topic, and I'd like to touch on TikTok as well, Director Wray. The TikTok CEO came to Capitol Hill and said a couple of things that I'd like to get your response on. One is he said that our data privacy concerns with regard to TikTok are not unique compared to other companies like Facebook and X, or otherwise known as Twitter. I personally agree that other social media apps have various data privacy concerns, but the key difference is that unlike TikTok, they're not owned by a company beholden to the CCP. And I just want to get your reaction to that. I presume that you agree that TikTok is unique in the sense that it's owned by a company beholden to the CCP.
Well, it's certainly unique by compared to Western companies, which are by their very nature not beholden to Western governments. And what makes TikTok so challenging is, and therefore so risky from a national security perspective, is that we're talking about a government in the Chinese government that has over and over and over again demonstrated contempt for the rule of law and international norms. And lines that we consider very important in the U.S. and in the West between the private sector and the government, those are lines that are at best blurry, if not non-existent in the Chinese system.
Yeah. Director Wray, I want to ask you about the news that you broke during your testimony. Thank you for your proactive action with regard to disrupting, remotely disabling this Volt Typhoon campaign. A couple questions. One is, in this year of elections, obviously, Wang Yi, the foreign minister, recently told Jake Sullivan, assured him that the CCP is not going to interfere with our elections this year. How do we prevent that from happening?
Well, China's promised a lot of things over the years, so I guess I'll believe it when I see it. It would be the starting point. Second, we work very hard across the interagency, all the agencies you see represented here, plus a whole host of other partners, to try to anticipate and prevent any efforts to interfere in our elections. And there have been enormous strides made over the years, not just amongst all three of our agencies, but between our agencies and state and local election officials, secretaries of state, et cetera, to try to prevent cyber interference, for example, in our electoral system. And there's, of course, also the pervasive problem of malign foreign influence in terms of disinformation campaigns and things like that. And there, again, we have to work with the private sector and not just the interagency. But all that has to be combined with the public's role in being a more discerning and media literate populace, because they have a role to play here, too.
Sorry, one last. The routers you talked about, how many states were they located in?
I don't have the number of states with me. I know that it was hundreds of routers, and it is a good example of the point that Director Easterly was making in her opening statement. These small office, home office routers were very outdated, which made them easy targets for the Chinese government. And these small office, home office routers were not themselves the intended targets. The targets, of course, were our critical infrastructure, but what the Chinese were doing were using these easy targets to hide and obfuscate their role in the hacking of our critical infrastructure. And so that's why the point that was made about making sure that we're not creating an easier attack surface for them is so important.
Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Thanks again for your service. General Nakasone, thanks so much for your 37 years of service to our nation. I'd like to begin with you. There are some that would assert that other nations conduct cyber operations. Some of those things could have consequences on entities like hospitals and water systems and power grids and other civilian targets. What makes the PRC activities like embedding latent malware into systems, what makes it unique in relation to other responsible cyber actors?
Responsible cyber actors of democracies like our own do not target the civilian infrastructure. There's no reason for them to be in our water. There's no reason for them to be in our power. This is a decision by an actor to actually focus on civilian targets. That's not what we do.
Let me ask this too. The ranking member talked about attribution, determining exactly who was behind the cyber attacks and then making sure that there are repercussions for those actions. I would argue too, it's not just about us playing defense, because we will never get out in front of the insidiousness that happens with cyber attacks and those folks that dream up ways to attack our system. But one thing that we can do very effectively is to have a very robust offensive capability as a deterrent, so that folks understand, like China, that if there is a cyber attack on this nation that goes after our critical infrastructure, that what will be coming back their way will be orders of magnitude greater. First of all, do we have the capability to do that? And if so, do we communicate that in various ways so that China knows what the consequences will be if they take such an action?
We do have the capability, and we're very, very good, the best. And in terms of the way that we communicate it in many different ways. From our policymakers who have these discussions, to the exercises that we conduct, to the real-world examples that we do with a series of different partners. The other thing that I would tell you is that, first of all, is that we have discovered what they're doing and we have exposed it. Secondly, the partnerships that exist here between our agencies and our commands is something that concerns the Chinese. And finally, it's the work with the private sector that gives us scale. They may have 50 to 1, but when we have the private sector, we outnumber them.
So, Nakasone, I'm also very concerned about the CCP prepositioning within our critical infrastructure like oil and gas pipelines. Give me a reason why someone would preposition in those critical infrastructure, and what conclusion should we reach as Congress and the American people from these reports?
As Director Easterly talked about, this is an attempt to provide the Chinese options in crisis or conflict. When we have discovered them in these critical infrastructures, the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that we get them out. And the second thing is that we need to have a vigilance that continues onward. This is not an episodic threat that we're going to face. This is persistent. This is the generational piece that Director A talked to. We have to operate every day. We have to have a vigilance. We have to have offensive and defensive capabilities.
Director Easterly, you talked about holding software companies liable for the software that they've written for a variety of different sources, especially the electric grid. Give me your perspective on how we would most effectively do that. How could we do that in a timely way? How could we make sure that it's done in two ways to make sure that any future software that's written is held liable for its vulnerabilities? And how do we retroactively then address software that's already there that exposes those liabilities?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As you pointed out, this is both a current problem and a legacy issue. Yeah. What is critical is that we start now to develop a regime, and this was part of the National Cyber Strategy, that can actually hold software makers liable for creating defective technology, because frankly, I believe if we had something like that and that was put in place at the dawn of the internet and when software was developed, we would not be in a world where the internet's full of malware and software is rife with vulnerabilities. So we need a software liability regime that's based on a measurable standard of care, but also safe harbor for those software developers who do responsibly innovate by prioritizing